Fireworks cracked open the summer sky above a small town in Ohio, bursting into blues and golds that reflected off parked cars and smiling faces. Laughter spilled from backyards. The smell of grilled meat and sugar hung warm in the air. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old pop song too loudly, the bass thumping like a happy heart. It was a night made for celebration, for forgetting what hurts. 2 blocks away, the light changed. In a narrow street where the lamps flickered instead of shone, a tired duplex leaned slightly to one side, its paint peeling like old skin. Inside the left unit, the air smelled of damp carpet, instant noodles, and antiseptic wipes. The celebration outside reached this place only as distant echoes, muffled laughter, fireworks reduced to dull thuds, joy filtered through walls it could not enter. Sarah Johnson sat at a small kitchen table, her shoulders hunched, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug that had long since gone cold. She was 42 years old, though the deep lines around her eyes and the stiffness in her fingers made her look older. Her brown hair, once thick, was tied back with a fraying elastic. Every movement carried the quiet ache of someone who had learned to live with pain instead of fighting it. The overhead light buzzed softly, casting a weak yellow circle on unpaid bills spread before her like accusations. The refrigerator hummed unevenly, struggling to keep going, much like Sarah herself. Each breath she took felt measured, careful, as if even oxygen might run out. Outside, another firework exploded, bright enough that its color briefly slipped through the thin curtains. For a second, the kitchen walls glowed blue. Then the darkness returned. Sarah closed her eyes and pressed her thumb into the crack of the mug, feeling its rough edge. Somewhere in town, people were clinking glasses and making wishes. Here, the only sound was the ticking of a cheap clock and the low rumble in her chest. Hunger, worry, and something heavier she could never quite name. This was the night where 2 worlds existed side by side, one drowning in light, the other learning how to breathe in the dark. Sarah Johnson had not always been invisible. At 42, she moved slowly, favoring her left leg where the pain flared like a quiet fire that never went out. The doctors called it degenerative joint disease, words that sounded clean and distant compared to the daily reality of swollen joints and nights spent awake staring at the ceiling. On bad days, her hands trembled when she tried to button her shirt. On worse days, she couldn't stand long enough to cook. She was a single mother, though the title felt hollow now. Her son, Michael, had left 3 years earlier for a job across the country, chasing stability she could never give him. Their calls had grown shorter, then rarer, until they stopped altogether. Not from lack of love, but from shared shame. Neither wanted the other to hear how broken things had become. Sarah worked when her body allowed it, cleaning offices after hours, wiping down desks that smelled of cologne and success. But as her health declined, so did her hours. Eventually, the calls from her supervisor stopped coming. Now the world seemed to move on without noticing she had been left behind. On the table lay the proof of her unraveling, an electricity bill marked Final Notice, $487.23, overdue by 3 weeks. Beside it, a rent reminder for $1,150 due in 4 days. Her checking account balance, scribbled on a scrap of paper, read $42.17. She had counted it twice, hoping numbers might change if stared at long enough. The fridge held half a carton of milk, a bruised apple, and a small container of rice. She rationed everything: food, pain medication, even hope. Each morning she chose which ache she could survive that day. Her hands rested on the table, fingers stiff, nails short and clean out of habit rather than comfort. She inhaled slowly, catching the faint scent of lemon cleaner still clinging to her clothes from her last job. It reminded her of who she used to be: useful, needed, part of something. The fireworks outside had stopped. Silence filled the gaps between her thoughts. Sarah whispered to no one, "I just need a little more time." The room did not answer. The knock came the next morning, not at the door, but from memory. Sarah awoke to the sound of rain tapping against the window, each drop sharp and impatient. Her knee screamed as she swung her legs off the couch where she slept now, saving the bedroom to keep the heat off. The air smelled of wet pavement and mildew. She shuffled to the sink, turned the tap, and watched rust-colored water sputter before clearing. Even the pipes were tired. As she swallowed her last pain pill, her phone vibrated. A voicemail notification. It was from the hospital. Her chest tightened before she even listened. The message was calm, professional, merciless. Her insurance had lapsed months ago. The bill from her last emergency visit, when her leg gave out and she collapsed at work, was now due. $3,860. Immediate payment requested. Collections would follow. Sarah slid down the cabinet until she was sitting on the cold tile. The tile seeped into her bones. Her breath came shallow, uneven, as another memory pushed its way in. 10 years earlier, she had sat in a different kitchen, brighter, louder. Her husband's boots were by the door. He had promised things would get better once his drinking slowed, once the layoffs ended. But the promises thinned, just like his patience. One night, the shouting turned to silence. He left before sunrise, taking the car and most of the savings. The divorce papers arrived months later, impersonal and final. She raised Michael alone after that. 2 jobs, sore feet, constant fear. She skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. She ignored pain so he could play sports. And when her body finally broke, it did so without apology. Now eviction loomed. Darkness pressed in from every side. By afternoon, the rain had turned to a steady downpour. The power flickered once, twice, then went out. Sarah sat in the dim gray light, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the rain and the distant sirens. Hunger gnawed, her leg throbbed, the cold crept closer. That's when she heard it. A soft knock, not demanding, not loud, just careful. Sarah frowned, heart pounding. No one ever came here. She hesitated, then pulled herself up and moved toward the door. Sarah opened the door just enough to see him. He stood under the broken awning, rain soaking his thin jacket, water dripping from his hair onto the concrete. He looked older than her, maybe 60, maybe more. Age was hard to tell when life had been unkind. His face was pale, lips faintly blue, eyes sunken but gentle. One hand pressed against his side as if holding himself together. "I'm sorry," his voice rough, almost lost in the rain. "I don't need money. I'm hurt and cold. Could I sit somewhere warm for a minute?" The smell of wet fabric and iron, like blood mixed with rain, reached her. Sarah's first instinct was fear, then calculation. The heater was off. The power was gone. She had barely enough food for herself. Letting a stranger in meant risk. Letting him stay meant less warmth, less safety, less of everything. Her hand tightened around the doorframe. Her knee throbbed in protest. "I don't have much," she said quietly. He nodded as if he already knew. "A chair is enough. Water if you have it." Behind her, the apartment felt smaller than ever. The unpaid bills on the table, the apple in the fridge, the last of the rice. Her body screamed for rest, for protection, for survival. If she closed the door, she could still crawl back under her blanket. She could save what little strength she had left. No one would blame her. The world rarely did. Another shiver ran through the man's frame. He swayed slightly, catching himself on the railing. Sarah remembered all the times she had stood invisible, at counters, in waiting rooms, in pain, hoping someone would see her as human. She opened the door wider. Inside, she helped him to the only chair, her hands brushing his arm. His skin was cold, startlingly so. She filled a glass with water and set it before him, then tore a strip from an old towel to gently press against the blood seeping through his side. She moved slowly, carefully, ignoring the sharp burn in her joints. She cooked the rice, giving him most of it, pretending she wasn't hungry. She wrapped her blanket around his shoulders, though the room grew colder without it. That night, Sarah lay awake on the floor, shivering, listening to his uneven breathing. She had chosen him, even if it cost her everything. Sometime before dawn, the apartment changed. Sarah woke to warmth. At first, she thought the power had come back on. Then she realized the heater was still silent. The warmth didn't come from the walls, it came from the air itself, gentle and steady, like hands hovering just above her skin. The ache in her leg had softened, her breathing felt easier. She pushed herself up, heart racing. The chair by the window was empty. Panic surged. "Sir?" she called, her voice thin. Light filtered through the curtains, far brighter than the gray mornings she knew. It carried the clean scent of rain after a storm, mixed with something like fresh bread. Sarah limped forward. He stood near the window, no longer hunched, no longer trembling. His jacket was dry, the wound at his side was gone. When he turned, his eyes held a depth that made her chest ache, not with fear, but with recognition, as if she were being seen completely for the first time. She tried to speak, no words came. He smiled, not triumphant, but grateful. "You gave when you had nothing," he said softly. "You welcomed me when you were the one who needed saving." Tears blurred her vision. "I just didn't want you to be alone," she whispered. "That is never just," he replied. The light grew brighter, filling every crack of the room, the peeling paint, the unpaid bills, the worn furniture. When Sarah shielded her eyes and looked again, he was gone. But the warmth remained. Later that morning, the power returned. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. A charity had received an anonymous donation marked for emergency rent assistance. The amount covered her rent, her electric bill, and the hospital debt. Another call followed, a part-time job offer with flexible hours. Sarah sat at the table, hands shaking, sunlight pouring in. The chair by the window was empty, but it no longer felt lonely. Only then did understanding settle into her bones. The wounded traveler had been Jesus, not as thunder or spectacle, but as need, as cold, as hunger, as a fragile life asking to be seen. Sarah pressed her palm to the table, feeling its solid warmth, and wept, not from despair, but from awe. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me. The world outside kept celebrating, but inside that humble home, light had finally learned where to stay.